Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. New York City joins the World Health Organization's Global Outbreak Response Network after Trump withdraws the US from the agency. The move by Democratic leaders defies the president and seeks to maintain global health cooperation. Envoys from Russia and Ukraine meet in Abu Dhabi for US-brokered talks on ending the war. The meeting comes as a Russian cluster munitions attack kills 7 people at a market in Ukraine. Taiwan says the Trump-Xi phone call will help stabilize regional security amid rising Chinese military pressure. Beijing calls for mutual respect with Washington while warning over Taiwan. The US and Iran agreed to hold talks in Oman on Friday despite sharp differences over the scope of negotiations. Washington seeks to include Iran's missile program, while Tehran says only its nuclear file is on the table. The UN chief calls the expiry of the New START treaty a grave moment for global peace and security. He urges the US and Russia to quickly negotiate a new nuclear arms control framework. Ukraine's energy minister warns power cuts could intensify in the coming days. He says Russia may launch new air attacks on power and heating networks. A legal rights group says Venezuela frees 22 more political prisoners. The releases come as interim government promises slowly continue. Gaza health officials say Israeli tank shelling and airstrikes killed 24 Palestinians, including 7 children. The dead include a medic killed while responding to a strike in Khan Yunis. Those are the headlines. We start this hour amid tensions between Washington and Tehran. US President Donald Trump has warned Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in an interview with NBC News. Trump said that Khamenei should be worried. Let's take a listen in.
He should be. As you know, they're negotiating with us. They were thinking about starting a new site in a different part of the country. We found out about it. I said, you do that, we're going to do very bad things to you.
This comes as the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced on social media that the talks will take place in Muscat, Oman, at around 10 a.m. local time and thanked Oman for making all the necessary arrangements. Originally, Iran and the United States had agreed to meet in Istanbul, Turkey, with other Middle Eastern countries taking part as observers. But on Tuesday, Iran proposed moving the talks to Oman and holding them as strictly bilateral talks focused only on nuclear issues. Earlier reports suggested that Washington had decided to reject Iran's conditions. For now, though, both sides appear set to sit down in Muscat on Friday, with talks set to move forward as scheduled. Joining us now to discuss this is Colonel Sanjeet Sirohi, an international relations and defence expert, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for taking the time and joining us here on NewsX World. Donald Trump's public statements warning the supreme leader of Tehran. What is the effectiveness of this, and what does it do for trust heading into these negotiations starting on Friday?
Well, Thomas, good morning. Thank you very much for having me on your news channel and discussing very, very important and very, very serious matter. Now, the talks which are likely to be held on Friday, initially they were supposed to be held at Istanbul, where other observers from other Middle Eastern countries, including Pakistan, was supposed to be there as observers, but Iran has rejected that offer and they said that it should be totally in secret and bilateral talks between Americans and the Iranians. That is number one. Number two, now these talks, mainly there were 3 demands which the Americans had put doctrine. First was that stopping the enrichment. Number two was the cap on the missile program. And third was supporting the proxies. So Iran has said that the talks will only be strictly on the nuclear basis, nuclear talks, and nothing to do with enrichment of, nothing to do with supporting the proxies and on the missile program. So that is the point where I think there will be total discussion on that, and that is a very, very gray area, because Iran is not going to accept this demand of that the missile program should be stopped immediately, because that is the only thing they have which can have some deterrent effect on the Americans and the Israelis. Thomas.
Of course, this comes as what Donald Trump calls an armada builds up in the Iranian Gulf, with fears from Tehran that the United States might directly use military action on the country in a time where many analysts call the Iranian regime as unstable as it has been since 1979. Why would Iran proceed with these talks after being warned consistently in the way that it has?
Look, Iran at the moment knows that Iran cannot stand in front of Americans, because the way the Americans' armed forces are posturing in the Middle East, it is much more than what it was last year. So Iran also knows that if the peace talks they don't take place, and if they are not successful, then Americans have got a very clear objective, and that objective is to change the regime. Now, it is a matter of time only when the Americans will attack, but Americans will attack. That is what my opinion is, that they will attack. They are only just buying time, and at the right moment they will attack, and their main military objective will be of regime change. Now, how that regime change take place, whether Ayatollah Khamenei leaves Iran or he is killed by the American strikes, which they had carried out last year also, in which Israelis had killed top nuclear scientists and the military leaders. They may try same thing with Ayatollah Khamenei also. But this posturing of Americans is not there to go back. Their aim is very, very clear, because if they don't change the regime now, and if they fail to do that, then it will become much more later on. So they are just waiting for the right moment. Now, it could be that first they have a regime change and then they start attacking Iran, or first they attack Iran and then they have regime change. So that is the calculation which is, I think, which is going on in the mind of the Americans. And these peace talks, when they take place at Muscat tomorrow, let us see what is the outcome. But the main point of contention will be the missile program, which the Iranians, I don't think they will agree to that. Americans will pressurize them to agree to that. Thomas.
Of course, it's no secret that the United States, along with its longtime ally in the region, Israel, would like to see regime change inside Iran. However, domestically, this isn't too popular of a policy when it comes to direct military action inside Iran, with a lot of Donald Trump's MAGA base not supporting direct military intervention inside the Middle East. How much will these negotiations go forward? Of course, with that domestic pushback coming from Donald Trump's base, and of course the Democrats as well, with tensions building between the two nations.
Look, Thomas, if we see that for last 15-20 days, there have been a lot of pressure on Iran, and the military buildup is only, initially is only for a psychological warfare. They want to pressurize the Iranians, and they want to tell the world that if Iranians, they don't agree to these talks, and if there are no concluding talks take place, and there is no peace deal between Iran and America, then the Americans are going to strike. But I agree with you, Thomas, that the domestic, there is a lot of domestic pressure on this Donald Trump, because the midterm elections are also there. So he doesn't want the bodies back to come to America. So as far as the soldiers putting the boots on the ground, I don't think that will be an option which America is thinking about. It is only about the strikes which they did last year also, and similar strikes will also take place. But this time, the strikes will be much more severe and much more destructive. So it all depends on the talks which take place tomorrow, that is on Friday, and let's see what happens on that. And if the talks are this thing successful, then the Americans, they may withdraw. But let me tell you that Israelis are pressurizing Americans to change the regime, because if you remember last year when the war started, 12 days war started between Israel and Iranian, that time Mr. Netanyahu had given a speech, and in that he had asked the people of Iran that you must overthrow the regime, and we and Israelis and Iranians people will live together. So that is the main aim of Israel and Americans. Now, how do the Americans they achieve that? That is the $1 million question, and I think the Donald Trump administration is taking that much time at carrying out all calculations and all carrying out all risk calculation also, so that they don't they achieve what they want to achieve. Otherwise, if they don't achieve what they want to achieve, then Donald Trump is going to have very tough time during the midterm elections. Thomas.
Colonel Sanjit Sarohi, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a great pleasure to have you on the programme. Next, we turn over to the Russia, we move over to New York, and the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for the United States and Russia to quickly reach a new nuclear arms control deal after the expiration of the New START treaty. This development marks a grave moment for international peace and security, with no binding limits on the two countries' strategic nuclear arsenals. Guterres warned that the dissolution of decades of arms control could not come at a worse time, as the risk of nuclear conflict is at its highest in decades. Russia and the US control over 80% of the world's nuclear weapons. The expiration could also impact the 1970 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said any new agreement should include China, as the country's nuclear arsenal is rapidly growing. Both Russia and the US have declared they're no longer bound by the treaty, raising concerns about a potential arms race. Joining us now is Shruti Dasgupta, an international affairs expert and analyst, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Shruti, for joining us. Are the fears from Antonio Guterres warranted? Of course, we're now entering a new era where decades of nuclear negotiations and treaties between the United States and Russia have now come to an end. Are fears here justified?
Somewhat. Greetings, Thomas. What I feel is that this particular New START treaty was held in abeyance by Russia unilaterally from 2023, since US is supporting Ukraine's war against Russia. So that particular treaty has not been officially in effect for the past 2 years, 3 years now. So there is, and you've not seen a significant change in the nuclear profiles of these two nations. So it's not as if the end of the treaty that happens today on 5th of Feb is an immediate red button, red alert zone for the rest of the world, that these two superpowers are no longer controlled or governed by each other's ambitions or power structures. There is a disbalance and there's going to be nuclear proliferation just because this treaty has now ended as of today. So it's not that case. It is not going to be like that, because they have not been in this particular treaty or bound by it for the past 3 years. But there does need to be a non-proliferation treaty between these particular superpowers. And I, for a change, agree with USA when they say they need China into it also, because you need bigger powers, powers that have vetoes, powers that have not just control of a large amount of nuclear arsenal, but control of large amount of economy, are bigger players in the world, to be controlled by mutually balanced treaties, where they are not allowed to progress, to compete with each other, and they're allowed to be monitored by each other. So there is a need for a new treaty to be written. Joe Biden renewed the START treaty in 2000, but because of the Ukraine action, it was no longer in effect since 2023. So a new treaty is a way to go, but when you're having Russia and China and USA, just those three of them in the room, and talking back and forth about this treaty. Russia and China are really good partners, and they would try and skew any new treaty towards their particular interests. So there has to be a balance in it. So who brings the balancing factor? Does UK? I don't think UK, despite being a nuclear armed nation, has the same amount of weight economically or politically in the world today as it had probably 10, 20, 30 years ago. So they need to question which is another power that they will bring in with USA to balance out what Russia and China together as a bloc can bring, and force USA into a corner or onto a deal which they might not want. And then we have three nations just talking every day on the table, but never actually inking a deal that would limit and balance out these nuclear arsenal powers and their ambitions.
And can negotiations really take place at this point in time? Of course, some people calling the Russia-Ukraine war a proxy war. Do you think we're at the right geopolitical flashpoint for those negotiations to happen, and of course bringing China in as well?
So it's not untrue when they call the Russia-Ukraine war a proxy war, because that is exactly what it is. Ukraine is taking a heavy beating, it's taking a heavy loss, its people are facing very dire circumstances only because Europe and USA, under the banner of NATO, want to compete with Russia. And they've been trying to plant missiles all over the map, trying to encircle Russia, and there have been boundaries that have been pushed despite repeated agreements with Putin. So when you push the red buttons and you poke the bear is going to growl back sometimes. And unfortunately for them, that is a Russian bear, and now Ukraine is paying a heavy price for it. Although they may not admit to it, but the amount of money flowing to it, it's been armed to its teeth and it's still losing, should show the world that Russia is not that easily bullied as they would like the world to believe. So there is that dynamic, but I do believe that there is going to be peace in the year of 2026. I hope that the Russia-Ukraine war comes to an end and they find a deal which is mutually beneficial to the victors as well as the suffering nations, and they find a way to coexist. And when that does happen, then there is going to be unfortunately for Ukraine, there's going to be some concessions it's going to have to make, whether they like it or not, because they're not actually winning the war, no matter how they project it. Beyond that, so once that particular war is put to bed, then there is going to be a bigger conversation of how Russia and USA cooperate. Putin's a smart player. He knows how to play Trump. You've seen that happen in Alaska. You've seen that happen over the past year, while all the negotiations around the peace deals have been happening. So the smart player, he's there, and when you bring in China into the context, China, he's put out a tweet yesterday saying he's had a wonderful conversation with China, and he's also projected China as the number 2 nation, the G2. He's called it before. Trump has called it before. So Trump holds China at a certain level, and he feels very, very safe with Russia and Putin and their ambitions or whatever their political strategies are. So I do believe he might want to actually bring this particular trifecta into action, but I do not know whether he'll be able to make it beneficial for USA in the long term.
Shruti, China has a far smaller arsenal than the likes of Russia and the United States. Do you think China would agree to limits here, and what would be the incentives?
That's the difference when there's an iron curtain. What is declared and what is not declared. What we know and what might be the actual ground reality is there might be differences, which is why US is already very chary. It's already saying that it has a lot of nuclear arsenal, which is completely ungoverned. So although the official figures might seem small, but even a single nuclear missile is quite deadly for all of humanity, not just the nation that is producing it or the nation that is using it. So any nation with a nuclear arsenal is potentially a threat. And if it's a larger arsenal, some of it declared, some of it not declared, is something that should cause concern. So we can't go into China and examine everything that's happening. We don't want there to be another Wuhan moment where that was a biological weapon and you might find yourself uncovering deeper nuclear secrets. So let's not dismiss China as a nuclear threat. It has expansionist plans under Xi Jinping. It has declining economy. It has dissatisfied people. It has an aging population. It's a wounded civilization as of now, and it might retaliate in ways that is not conventional. And that is something that we need to be very wary of. And hence the need to bring China onto the table where they're forced or they're convinced that they need to sign a deal and adhere to it both.
Shruti Dasgupta, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. It was, of course, a pleasure to talk to you as always. We now move on to our next story, and the US Department of Justice has released a massive trove of millions of files related to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Among the 2,000 videos included in this release is a notable nearly 2-hour video of Epstein being questioned about sex crime allegations and his lifestyle. This release was mandated by the Epstein Files Transparency Act, signed into law by President Donald Trump in November of 2025. Video from the night of Epstein's death in 2019 was also made public, though analysis by experts has identified discrepancies and missing minutes in the footage. We move on now. Dozens of workers from auto parts manufacturer Brake Parts Incorporated, a subsidiary of US corporation First Brands Group, maintained vigils and bonfires outside the closed plants in Ciudad Juarez while awaiting severance payments after the company declared bankruptcy in the US. The crisis erupted following the sudden closure of 5 First Brands Group plants on the border, leaving workers uncertain about receiving their compensation. Since the night of January the 25th, BPI employees and workers from other plants established encampments to prevent machinery from being removed without guaranteeing payment of labour debts. First Brands founder Patrick James was indicted for fraud after the bankruptcy that affected lenders Ford and General Motors. Let's in fact listen in to some of the workers awaiting for their payment.
Las puertas de la planta nos cerraron ya y no trabajamos ahorita. Esperamos que nos liquiden. No sé qué tiempo, pero esperamos que nos liquiden al 100%. Que nos sacaron certificaciones, nada, ni por qué, ni no nos explicaron nada y en la planta pues ya no hay nada.
Se agüita uno, porque puede ser jale, si no trabajas no comes. Y luego me quitan Infonavit, todo eso los afecta. Así es, todo eso afecta para la economía, pues.
We turn to some tech news next, and Instagram has recovered a brief outage that affected over 10,000 users in the United States. Outage tracking site DowDetector.com reported a total of over 10,000 incidents of experiencing issues with the social media platform as of 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. However, the number of incidents dropped sharply within the next hour, indicating the platform's quick recovery. While the cause of the outage remains unclear, Instagram users in the US were temporarily unable to access the platform, leading to a brief period of frustration for many. The outage comes as social media platforms face increasing scrutiny over their reliability and service interruptions. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.